What's up, y'all? Today I have 5 book reviews. Let's get into it. So, book one is The Reformatory. This is a book. Actually, let me see. One, two. 4 of these books made my top 15 reads of the year. Yeah, that's crazy. 4 of the books that I'm talking about today, 4 of the 5 made my top 15 reads of the year. But anyways, the first book is The Reformatory. This book follows um, a boy named Robbie through the horrors. It's a historical fiction slash horror. It follows Robbie through like the horrors of a reformatory school. So in this book, the reformatory school is called Gracetown School for Boys, but in real life, it was a reformatory school in Marianna, Florida that operated for like 111 years. But yeah, so in this book, it was Gracetown, and it just talks about what his life looks like trying to survive in this place. And then it has a dual storyline of his sister who is trying to rescue him from this place. So this book was really good. It's one of the ones that made my top 15 reads of 2024. It was so creative. I feel like the author, like, while this was a real life like, it was based on real life tragedy, real life abuse and injustice and inhumanity and disgusting people. Like, there was so much blame to go around from like the people that was the government that was sending them there, the judges, the actual people that operated a home, the citizens in the town. Like, so much blame to go around. And this author took all of that, put it into a book, and then added a horror element that only enhanced what all, like, it only drove home the point that was already there. So I feel like what the liberties that the author took, it it helped the story in a positive way. She made the story her own. It was very creative. It still like stayed true to the real life tragedy that these boys went through. It brought in like an element of what his family went through, that they weren't in the home, like they weren't in the reformatory school, but what they went through. We got to see that. It had another character, Miss Lottie, who was an older woman. I like older characters, and I feel like she had a lot of character development that I could appreciate. So I liked multiple characters in this book. It just had depth to them, and it was really good to see their perspective in this story. It does have like, yeah, this is in a synopsis, so it's not a spoiler. Robbie sees saints or ghosts. So there's a part of this talks about like what it's like growing up in this time. So many good things in this book, and it made my list for all of those reasons. Yeah. The next book, book two, this is kind of related to the first book. It is, but it's not. It also made my top 15 list of 2024, and that is The Nickel Boys by Colson Whitehead. This book is also based on a real life horror of that reformatory school in Marianna, Florida. But in this book, we follow the character Elwood, and the school is the Nickel Academy. So, like I said, both of these books, this and the Reformatory, they both focus on this historic place, like the real life crimes and horrors that actually happened to these boys at this reformatory school. But they had 2 different approaches. So Colson Whitehead's approach was very much like in your face. His writing style was very sobering. It was very somber. It was very much like you just feel like it really like makes you just stare at the pages. Like, where I said that the Reformatory, they're both historical fiction, but the Reformatory felt like I'm reading an historical account. I mean, a historical fiction account of a real life tragedy. It felt like I was reading a historical fiction account of a real life tragedy, but it felt like fiction of a real life tragedy. The Nickel Boys felt like Elwood was real. It felt like I was reading a nonfiction book, and I had to remind myself this is a fictional account. Like, so that kind of shows you like there are 2 different writing styles. I felt like Elwood was legit Elwood, and I'm just reading like a secondhand account of his actual story. So his book felt like a punch in the face. It was no like, there's no other way to put it. When I read it, that's what I got from it. I feel like I had to put that book down a few times, and then how it ended was so like, it was just so well done. That's why this made my list of the top 15 reads of 2024 too, because I don't know. It just, it felt like it did the story justice. Like what those boys went through and experienced, and their families during that time at that academy. I feel like they both did a really good job at shedding light on that, like putting that out there for people to see and kind of empathize with, and like feel something for, because you like, you're mad, you like, how could you like, yeah, it's terrible. So I feel like both books did a really good job at showcasing what they actually went through during that time and just how evil it was. So yeah, that's why both of these books made it to my top 24 list, and this third one did too. This book is James by Percival Everett. Okay, so this book also made it to my top 15 of 2024. This book is a reimagining or retelling of the Adventures of Huckleberry Finn by Mark Twain. The author did state that instead of it being just a mere like retelling, it's more of like a conversation with the original text, which I can see. I can see it's told from Jim's perspective. So Jim was a character in Huckleberry Finn. It's told from his perspective, and he reclaimed his identity by calling himself James instead of going by Jim. So it shows just his account going with Huckleberry down in Mississippi and all that that looks like. I think this book was done so well. Like it gave depth to Jim. Not saying that there was no depth to him in Huckleberry Finn, but it just gave it a different spin. Like Percival Everett took this book and he made it his own. It's a standalone book. Like you did not need to read the actual Adventures of Huckleberry Finn to be able to appreciate and look at this book and be like, yeah, this was done well. It definitely stands on its own. He made it was it, he just put like a creative spin on it, and I'm glad that he did, because like he said, it really wasn't just a retelling. Like it literally came from a different perspective. He had a different tone. It had like bits of philosophy in there. It had like satire, irony. Yeah, like, which now that I think about it, those are kind of like the themes that I got going through the Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, but it was just a different way. So I appreciated that it was well written. I like the like conversation that was had in it. Um, yeah. So this was a really good book. I appreciated it. I understand why it won the awards that it did, because it was just that good. Next, we have The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn by Mark Twain. So I know I said you did not have to read this to be able to enjoy James, and you didn't, but I did. I read The Adventures of Tom Sawyer first, then The Adventures of Mark Twain, then I read James. And The Adventures of Mark Twain, The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn made my top 15 list of 2024 too, because it was just so good. Like, I know a lot of people find this book problematic. I know it receives a lot of criticism, especially today. I know that. And I also know that it receives a lot of accolades and is highly acclaimed, and I understand why. Like, this is definitely a book of its period. It's not a 2025 book. It's just not. It's definitely a book that can ruffle a lot of feathers. It could be offensive. It has racial slurs in it. It has it's a lot of stuff that's hard to digest in that too. Even like when you think about, it's told from Huckleberry Finn's point of view, and you think about him being like a preteen, or like he was like 12 or 13, and the stuff he was doing and what he was going through, you just think like, what? Like, So it is hard to get through. I could see why people don't like it, but I did. To me, it was almost genius how Mark Twain used like these silly, childish vehicles to like convey themes of racism, especially in American South of then and shoot the American South of today. It had themes of religion and war and freedom, and like it talked about, it had like he showed the irony in a lot of it and hypocrisy in a lot of like these thoughts. And like you got Huckleberry Finn and Jim, who at the time were kind of like at the bottom of the totem pole. Jim was a runaway slave, and you had Huckleberry Finn, who was the son of the town drunkard. You know what I mean? So, and then how they like, you can see you have Huckleberry, who was literally groomed essentially to become this racist, and how you can kind of see like how his perspective shifts and changes. And I found myself wondering like what became of him. Like, did he become just like his daddy, or did he do something else? Then I wanted to know, like Jim, I've seen people like criticize this book and say that Jim was very one dimensional, and you saw him as like he was portrayed as like this ignorant slave who just didn't know anything and super stereotypical. But when I read that, I didn't see him as one dimensional. I saw through a lot of the conversation, through a lot of the things that he actually taught Huckleberry, a lot of decisions he made, he came across as very smart, very much like he had layers to him. He was a character with depth, just like Huckleberry was. So I enjoyed it. I felt like it was a lot. It's a lot to be discussed when it comes to like talking about this book. And for me, I think it was done well. Actually, Ernest Hemingway said that this book is a book that that modern literature is built on. Like it all stems from the Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. And like that's Hemingway is, like for him to say that, it's like wow. Anyways, it was good. It was told from Huckleberry Finn's perspective, first person point of view, and I enjoyed it. Lastly, we have The Adventures of Tom Sawyer by Mark Twain. This book was told from third person point of view. So it wasn't told from Tom Sawyer's point of view. It was more silly. This Tom Sawyer, the Tom Sawyer that's in The Adventures of Tom Sawyer, and the Tom Sawyer that shows up in The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn are like two different Tom Sawyers. Like he is way more sinister and evil in Huckleberry Finn, way more like, and in The Adventures of Tom Sawyer, he kind of comes across as just like this mischievous child that's always like playing games and jokes and pranks and stuff. But in The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, he comes across like sinister and evil and hateful, you know, and just like a menace. Yeah. So, The Adventures of Tom Sawyer was released before The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn too, and The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn was supposed to be a sequel to The Adventures of Tom Sawyer. So, I wonder if the different points of view is the reason that you kind of get this different Tom, or like what is it? I don't know. I mean, I don't know, but it was a good book. It just, yeah, I don't know. It was interesting to know that when Mark Twain wrote it, he was like going back and forth between whether it was a kid's book or a book for adults. And like, I imagine like a child reading this book, just being like wide eyed, like, wow. Like, it was so silly. Because, like I said, in this book, he was doing all these pranks and this crazy stuff. But it also, like, it was a book of his time. And it's like, bro, you doing that, you need a whooping, you know? So, I don't know. But, anyways, those are the 5 books that I reviewed today. Let me know if you've read these, what you think, and I'll catch y'all next time.